Before beginning this video, I think it's worthwhile stating that this is without doubt one of the most disturbing cases I have ever come across. I therefore feel obliged to tell the viewer that they may find the details discussed in this video extremely upsetting.
Mam tak samo jak ty, miasto moje, a w nim najpiękniejszy mój świat, najpiękniejsze dni. Zostawiłem tam kolorowe sny.
Our story begins in the Polish city of Krakow. It's late at night on the 6th of January 1999 and it's fiercely cold. A tugboat named the Elk is making its way up the Vistula River. The night had been uneventful and the boat's crew were about to moor and finish work. However, before they reached the docking area, the propeller gave out. There was nothing unusual about this. The Vistula was full of discarded rubbish, which sometimes got entangled in the propeller, bringing it to a halt. The boat was close enough to float the rest of the way, and the captain docked. Exhausted from the day's work, the captain decided to go home and rest. He would investigate what might be causing the problem in the morning. On that morning, he woke up, grabbed something to eat, and made his way out the door. It was icy cold, and he wasn't looking forward to the prospect of having to disentangle whatever might be causing the problem. Nonetheless, on arrival at the dock, they set about their task and saw that an odd, pale, spotted and foul-smelling object was wrapped around the boat's machinery. While extricating the strange mass, they simply thought it was fabric, possibly leather. But that assumption went out the window when their attention was drawn to what was clearly a human ear. There was no body, there was only skin, and they therefore called the police. The skin had been removed meticulously. This at first led the police to conclude it was the work of someone who had experience removing animal hides. Be that as it may, they had an unidentified body, and they therefore descended on the Vistula River, searching for the rest of the flayed remains. It was over a week later before police would find the right leg, flesh from the buttock, and items of clothing. The rest of the body parts would never be recovered. After DNA testing, it was discovered that the victim was Katarzyna Zowada. She was a 23-year-old student studying religion at the Jagiellonian University, Krakow. Katarzyna was born on the 1st of June 1976. Family and friends called her Kasia. She was an avid fan of music and enjoyed listening to bands associated with the hippie movement of the 1960s. The one band she admired the most was the Grateful Dead. Kasia was extremely close to her father. Both loved the outdoors and were fond of excursions out into the wild. 3 years before the gruesome discovery of her partial remains, her father, while out hiking with her, would have an accident. He lost his balance and incurred a spinal injury, which would worsen and later lead to his death. Those who knew Kasia have said that she became withdrawn and depressed. In many ways, she saw herself as partly responsible for the accident. This led her mother to seek help, and at the time of her initial disappearance, she was undergoing therapy. On the day of her disappearance, she was expected to meet her mother, Marta Zowada, at one of these therapy sessions. When she didn't arrive, this caused concern, as Kasia was known to be a willing and reliable patient, desperately seeking help and answers. It was November 12th, 1998, when she was reported missing. A number of scenarios went through her mother's head before she went to police. In post-Soviet Poland, wayward cults had sprung up to fill the vacuum left after the fall of communism. Her mother therefore posited that Kasia may have joined one of these sects. It does appear to be an unusual idea, but I say that not knowing anything about Polish youth culture during the 1990s. And so I really don't know how likely this was to be the case. Anyhow, with this theory in mind, her mother went directly to a Dominican monastery known for extracting young people from these groups. They advised her to go to the police and make a report. She did, but police didn't take her concerns seriously. As far as they were concerned, Kasia was a 23-year-old woman who would show up eventually. Noticing the lack of interest, Marta hired a private detective who spoke to those who might have seen her. Unfortunately, no information was forthcoming, and the question as to what happened to her daughter remained a mystery. Kasia was last seen on the morning of the 12th by her mother. She was wearing a hooded corduroy coat, black jeans and red shoes. Other than this, there was no information to work off. Marta did receive some phone calls, 2 in all. The caller said he had information on what had happened to her daughter and asked if he could meet her in Krakow. After taking the advice of the private investigator, who believed the call was a hoax, she decided not to follow up on the lead and instead focused on canvassing the university Kasia had attended. Nothing came of this. She would have to wait until the grim discovery on January 6th, which was confirmed to be her missing daughter. As the medical examiner scrutinised the remains of Katarzyna, he noticed that her skin had been neatly cut away at the thighs and neck, reaching only as far as the left ear, without the face and arms. Her nipples were also absent. There was an oblique seam going from under the right breast to the left shoulder. Her body had been in the river for an estimated 2 to 3 weeks before discovery. The murder of Kasia was unprecedented, and the police clearly felt as though they would need the help of outside agencies, most notably the FBI. Even they had not experienced anything as grisly as this. Granted, there had been cases in which skin had been removed from corpses after the demise of the person. The case of Ed Gein comes to mind. But he had removed corpses from local graveyards and subsequently made items from their bones and skin. He was caught when he murdered a local store clerk. He was in the process of preparing her body when police entered and searched his house. Ed Gein aside, the police believed that the crime had been inspired by the film Silence of the Lambs, which had been released in 1991. Katarzyna is the Polish equivalent of the victim's name in the movie, Kate, though this may simply be coincidental. One aspect that did raise eyebrows was the manner of skinning used by the protagonist, Buffalo Bill. It was noticeably similar to the way Kasia was flayed and then sutured. Like Buffalo Bill, the killer had seemingly skinned her with the grossly macabre intention of wearing her body as a suit. In subsequent years, other details of her killing have emerged. These particular details are horrifying, but they in some way outline the profile of the killer. A profile we will look at in more detail once I've given a summary of the investigation. The pathologist has said that Kasia was brutally beaten and tortured before her death. There was also signs that the killer had used a slow method to bring about her end. she had been found with 4 puncture marks located on both armpits and on the inside of both thighs. This would have led to her bleeding out and falling into unconsciousness. It's also been speculated that she was alive during the flaying, though this cannot be ascertained with absolute certainty. One can only hope that this was not the case. Once the details of her demise had been accounted for, police were keen to look into her movements and habits in the weeks prior to her disappearance. The first abnormality came to the fore when they realised she had not attended her university lectures in the 3 weeks prior to her mother reporting her missing. This was seen by all to be unusual, especially her mother. As far as she was concerned, Kasia was following her normal routine. She would arise out of bed at the same time, leave at the same time, and return home at the same time, so nothing in her movements appeared out of the ordinary. The obvious question on discovering a diversion from normal routine was to ask why. Police looked into the possibility that she had met someone who had led to the altering of her schedule, possibly a love interest. Other factors emerged which gave this line of thinking further credibility. She had changed the colour of her hair from black to blonde and attempted to lose weight. These details have even led some to speculate that the killer may have been priming her. Was she urged to lose weight so that there would be excess skin that would make her more suitable to the killer's body type? On the 31st of May, 1999, the police in Krakow received a call from an elderly man saying he had found his son's dead body in his basement. He believed his grandson was responsible. When police arrived, they were confronted with a gruesome scene. The victim, the 50-year-old son of the man who had called, had been decapitated, and his skin had been removed from the scalp down. The scene was made all the more bizarre when police followed the old man up to his kitchen. As they drew closer, a man's voice could be heard. He was singing in Russian while dancing. It later turned out that this jolly fella had murdered his father, flayed the skin from his head and worn it as a face mask. After doing this, he walked into his grandfather and attempted to play the role of his dead dad. Due to bad eyesight, which seems to be a sizable understatement, his grandfather believed it to be his son. The name of the grandson was Vladimir W. Police in Poland don't release surnames. I can only presume this is done so that they don't suffer issues on release from prison. Law enforcement were drawn to the obvious similarities existing between this case and that of Kasia's. This interest increased when they learned both he and Kasia attended the same university. He had enrolled the year before Kasia started, and they were about the same age. Interesting as all this may seem, police quickly realised there was no connection between the two of them. A further search of the home brought no new evidence suggesting Kasia was ever there, and police did not charge him with Kasia's murder. Obviously, he was charged with the death of his father. Apparently, his motivation was his father's abandonment of his mother in Russia. Essentially, it was an extreme and disconcerting form of revenge. Vladimir is now doing his time in Russia. Suspect number 2 has never been named. The only information released about him is that he was known to stalk women along the Vistula River. Police knew that he had misogynistic tendencies, and he had sexually assaulted at least one woman. However, after a good time looking into this particular suspect, they decided it was not him and dropped their formal investigation. Polish police, with help from other foreign agencies, including the FBI, produced a detailed profile of the killer. That profile is as follows. The perpetrator was a male in his 20s or 30s. He suffered from severe psychological abnormalities. He was a sadistic psychopath with narcissistic tendencies. He had above average intelligence. His motive was sadosexual. He was most likely a surgeon, butcher, a veterinarian, or a tailor. He possessed a desire to be female. The brutality of the murder indicated a deep anger towards the victim. It's described as an anger that's not personal, it's general, meaning the perpetrator is angered by his inability to be female. His sexual sadism possibly indicates an inability to partake in ordinary sexual intercourse. The infliction of pain is an alternative which brings about a corresponding pleasure. It's sometimes known in the forensic pathology field as an equivalent murder. It's believed he has all the characteristics to be a repeat offender. It's also believed that he stalked his victim before selecting them for his grim undertakings. He would also need the victim to be about his size. Kasia was 5 foot 6 inches. There is also a possibility that he was in contact with Kasia before she met her demise. Some have gone so far as to suggest that he may have used her hobbies as a way of garnering trust, and police followed this line of inquiry when visiting cinemas, music outlets and bookstores to see if anyone fitting Kasia's description was seen in the presence of a man not yet accounted for. Subsequent to looking at the 2 possible suspects and releasing both without charge, police were able to extract foreign DNA from Kasia's skin. As exciting as this new evidence appeared, it led nowhere and the case went cold. This led police to head in directions some, including myself, find strange. They used clairvoyance. One of these, I'll call him a psychic, picked up on something the police found interesting. Apparently, it had something to do with a line of inquiry abandoned during the initial investigation. The psychic claims that after his interchange with police, they took a closer look at this evidence or suspicion. Being honest, we've been unable to find out what it was that police found so interesting. So we'll move on to new information that came to light with the advent of new technology. It was 2012 when this new technology brought a fresh vigour to the investigation. Police utilised a 3D body scanner in order to get a picture of the last moments of her life. They were able to determine the magnitude of injuries inflicted upon her. As we already know, she was badly tortured before her death. The 2 new pieces of evidence which stood out were as follows. Vegetation not present in the Vistula River was observed on Kasia's skin. Police also determined that an instrument used in martial arts was used while inflicting the injuries pre-mortem. They therefore concluded that the person was familiar with martial arts. With this new information, they looked at the case afresh. Nothing substantial came of it for 5 years, but on receiving details from a member of the public, they began to look at a man who had come up early in the investigation. This member of the public was a woman who said she knew of a mechanic who worked at a morgue. She stated that he was infatuated by Kasia's murder and also lived in Tirnatarska, close to where her partial remains were found. The arrested man has been named in local news reports as Robert J., a 52-year-old man at the time of his arrest. He fit in many ways the profile of the killer outlined by law enforcement. Robert had served in the military. While serving, he worked in the morgue where he assisted in dissections. Subsequent to his service in the army, he was an employee of the Zoological Institute, where he skinned animals. His contract was later terminated because he killed rabbits used in experiments. Another aspect that police found interesting was his attendance at a gym where he partook in a number of martial arts exercises. Though Robert didn't achieve much in terms of a career, he is reported to be unusually intelligent. He had a propensity to walk aimlessly around Krakow in order to pass time. A favourite diversion of his was attending the cinema, and it's believed this is where he first met Kasia. Though it's also been speculated that a former teacher of his introduced the two. Police had shown an early interest in him as early as 2000. In fact, he's reported to be suspect too. As stated, he was known to have worn female attire. He also stalked women along the banks of the Vistula. Unfortunately, there was not enough evidence linking him to the killing for police to charge him. But on the 4th of October 2017, almost 19 years after the death of Kasia, they stopped him on the street, detained him, and chauffeured him into the back of a police car to a Krakow police station for questioning. After this arrest, a number of circumstantial details came to light. Newspapers reported that in the months after the discovery of Kasia, he became ever more zealous in his religious observations and began to attend masses daily. More perturbing deeds featured. For example, he regularly visited the gravesite of Kasia after the sun had set. Cemetery workers witnessed him repeatedly bringing flowers and, on occasions, burying letters in the vicinity. Police attempted to retrieve these letters, but were unable to do so. Marta, Kasia's mother, also noticed that a candle was always left at her graveside and was relit after it had gone out. With all these reports from multiple witnesses, police decided to install surveillance cameras to document his activities. They discovered that he visited the grave not just regularly, but every night. Though Robert claims he had never known Kasia, police came across a diary implicating him in the disappearance and murder. They were able to accumulate a great deal of information that had, up until then, been unknown. This included details of how Robert had gained her trust. He mimicked an interest in the books and music she liked, and he feigned an insincere connection between her and himself. It appears as though Kasia responded to his overtures, and even went so far as colouring her hair blonde, an aspect he preferred in women. Most damning of all the evidence found in this diary was his records of stalking activities carried out on numerous women. He also noted in gruesome detail the murder of Kasia, and these specifics make the case all the more disturbing. At first, police wouldn't release any information pertaining to the death, but more recently, details have emerged. On the day she vanished, Kasia had agreed to go, with Robert, to a cottage on the periphery of Krakow. Both made their way to the location by bus. The cottage is located on a small plot of land. Many of these properties dot the countryside around the city. Residents use them for growing a number of vegetables and normally tend to them at the weekend. On November 12th, 1998, it was a Wednesday. The area was quiet. Most people were working in the city. Rather than going to an isolated spot with someone she believed she could trust, she went with a reprehensible individual, intent on indulging his lurid desires. It's not known for how long, but as stated previously, these details have emerged. Those responsible for apprehending, charging and prosecuting him believe she was alive up until the 7th of December at the earliest, and the 14th of December at the latest. That's a full month after she went missing. During the trial, an investigator, his name is not mentioned, stated that physical evidence, namely Kasia DNA, was found in the bathroom of the previously mentioned cottage. Rather than accept this evidence, Robert J. has continued to say he never met Kasia. The investigator also described Kasia's environment and the injuries sustained in the weeks leading up to her death. It's alleged that Kasia was kept in a small room. Her right leg was restricted with the use of a strap located above the ankle joint, and there is reason to believe that drugs were also used to further subdue her. A number of injuries indicate that items such as a barbell and bodybuilding plates were used to break her pelvis and femur. Stab wounds, chop wounds, and lacerations were also found by medical examiners. A contrary piece of evidence also emerged in court proceedings. Earlier we stated that there was a possibility Kasia was skinned while alive. However, in reports it's indicated that the killer removed the skin post-mortem. On doing this, he tried to wear it, but it would not fit. It was kept in the apartment he shared with his mother, and later disposed of in the Vistula River. I'm not sure whether the contradiction is due to the forensic pathologist's inability to conclude with any degree of certainty, or if some new piece of information has led to the exclusion of the earlier mentioned possibility. As of today, Robert J. is still being held in prison awaiting trial. He's made a number of claims against prison staff, which have slowed up proceedings. Though I have to admit, I'm not sure why it's taken 3.5 years to try him. We do know that the judge feels the evidence against him is substantial enough to warrant his continued incarceration, and we can only hope that the case is concluded in as rapid and as fair a manner as possible. Justice must be done, and it must offer answers. In her final days, she came face to face with human depravity. A person who truly shows what evil is. The deprivation of all that is good. Not an ounce of good issued forth from her killer. There was no compassion, just blind bloodlust, with no aim other than the attainment of a perverse satisfaction. Those that knew and loved Kasia will never be able to put aside all those thoughts that press heavily upon them. A minor victory may come when justice is served. As usual, we will end with a few words on Katarzyna Zowada. The most obvious thing to say was that her life was robbed from her in the most distressing, ominous and diabolical way possible. In the year leading up to her death, she had wrestled with bereavement, depression and social isolation. She had met these challenges. She had tried to get a hold on them. She persisted in a quest to understand the world around her. And though uncertain of her path, as many individuals her age are, she was heading in a direction that nobody, including a loving mother, will ever get to see.
ty. Miasto moje, a w nim najpiękniejszy mój świat, najpiękniejsze dni zostawiłem tam, kolorowe sny.
Thanks once again to everyone for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please make sure to like, comment, share and subscribe to Mystery Scope. Until the next time, take care.